I tended to be someone who wanted to handle it myself, to be quiet, to grieve alone. And my survival journey involves the suicide of my husband. And suicide is not something we talk about easily in our culture. And we don't talk about death easily. We don't make a lot of room for grief and time to grieve, but we certainly don't want to talk about suicide. And so, I was a person who I just didn't want to share it. And I just sat in so much guilt and so many questions. But I slowly, over the last 5 years, have built my kitchen table. I call it my kitchen cabinet, my boardroom of women who are my champions and my ride or dies. And so I would say to anybody listening, going through a tough time, don't isolate, share your pain, have people around you whom you can really trust. Trust with your secrets.
Welcome to Linda's Corner, where we bring more hope, healing, and happiness to the world. My name is Linda Bjork, and today we're going to be talking about how we can grow from hard things. I'm delighted to welcome Theresa Bruno. Theresa is an overcomer. She is the host of the Soul Talks podcast and the founder and designer for Jordan Alexander Jewelry. You can listen to her podcast through YouTube, and I'll include that link in the show notes. Welcome, Theresa. I'm so glad that you could join with me today.
Thank you so much. And I'm so honored to be here with you. And I want to also say thank you so much for the amazing work that you're putting out in the world.
I appreciate that. It is so good to feel like the efforts that I'm making make a difference. And I think that a little bit of that feedback just kind of feeds the soul, like, it's okay, keep going. This is worth it. You're doing okay. So that means the world to me, Theresa, and I appreciate it. And I also very much appreciate what you're doing with your podcast, where this sharing of hard things, we're not hiding the hard things. We're not ashamed of our hard things. We are sharing. And something happens when we open ourselves up and become vulnerable and share. It not only helps to heal us, but it gives other people permission to share and to heal.
All of that 100%. One of the things I say over and over and over, both on my show and just in my survival journey. And it was a hard one kind of survival tool for me, because I did go into places of isolation and shame. I had to figure out how to come out of that. But one of the most powerful tools I could give somebody is to say, sharing your pain lessens its power. Every time you tell your story, every time you're willing to share it just a little bit, it doesn't have quite so much power over you because you've just kind of let it out a little bit. And I think, one of the other survival tools I'll say just on the upfront for anyone who's listening, our friends and our family, when we're going through tough times, whether it's a betrayal, a loss of a business, a divorce, death of a spouse, a child, whatever it is, it's so important to have people around us. I've spent the last 5 years following the advice of Michelle Obama, who I heard her talking to Oprah one day in an interview about her book, and Oprah said, what was it like that first, few months going into the White House? You were under such criticism socially, and people were attacking you mainly just for how you looked and how difficult that is for a woman. You were criticized for the size of your hips. You were criticized, and the list just went on. And she talked about how she had her kitchen table. And it's such an extraordinary way to frame it up. But she said, I had a group of women who were beside me in every major decision I made. I shared with them. They were my ride or dies. They held me up when I needed it. They, and they championed me. And that little bit of advice from her became really powerful for me in my survival journey, because I tended to be someone who wanted to handle it myself, to be quiet, to grieve alone. And my survival journey involves the suicide of my husband. And suicide is not something we talk about easily in our culture. We don't talk about death easily. We don't make a lot of room for grief and time to grieve, but we certainly don't want to talk about suicide. And so, I was a person who I just didn't want to share it. And I just sat in so much guilt and so many questions. But I slowly, over the last 5 years, have built my kitchen table. I call it my kitchen cabinet, my boardroom of women who are my champions and my ride or dies. And so I would say to anybody listening, going through a tough time, don't isolate, share your pain, have people around you whom you can really trust. Trust with your secrets.
And that makes such a difference. So, how beautiful to have a kitchen table or a kitchen cabinet, if we're thinking in presidential terms as well, that we can put, we don't have to trust everyone with our secrets.
No, we don't.
But we can select some people who are safe that we can trust. And so I think if we put that message out, it's like, hey, I need someone who's safe. That person or people will show up if we look for them, if we seek for them, because they're out there. There are people out there who are kind. There are people out there who are compassionate. There are people out there who are willing to listen. There are a lot of people who are not those things, and that's okay. We don't choose to share our stories with them. But there are a lot of people who fit that bill, who can be there when we need them, and we don't need to go through this alone. Now, you have referenced a little bit about your healing journey. Would you mind sharing some more? I mean, just in one word, you gave us a big kind of a shock of, oh, you're right. That is hard. That's beyond grieving. That is beyond. Suicide is more than normal grieving because there's confusion, there's shame, there's a whole extra layer of emotions that can pop up when we experience it and when we try to explain it, because other people have those same kinds of questions.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. I'll give you a little backstory and try to make it palatable because it's just not easy to hear. My husband James was we had been married almost 29 years and had 2 boys. And we always said about each other that we were peas and carrots. We just kind of did everything together. And he was my best friend. And we both had businesses of our own. We raised our children together. He was one of those partners who he picked the kids up at school as often as I did. And he cooked and cleaned the kitchen way more than I did. Just the kindest soul I've ever known. And in the last few years of our life together, there were a lot of big hits for him. And there was just kind of this low grade depression. And I would say to anybody listening also, if you're with somebody who's suffering from depression, pay attention to it because it can deteriorate quickly. And I think that is part of what happened with James. It was 1 month after COVID started in 2020. So it was April of 2020. And it kind of made the whole thing even more difficult and more surreal because, the whole world was isolating and the whole world was in this awful collective fear and chaos. What is happening to us as a civilization? What is this awful virus doing to us? And nobody was seeing each other. So when James took his life, if that had happened in our small town of Birmingham, Alabama, at any other time, I would have had his family, his fraternity, brothers, all of my friends. I would have had people around me to comfort me and help and be with my children. And that just wasn't the case. We were isolating like everybody else. And so I think it exacerbated early grief. One of the things, that we mentioned earlier is, and I think it's so important to really metabolize this. Whatever you're grieving, our culture doesn't even have a language for grief. Not really. We think, oh, you get 2 weeks off from work if you've lost someone close to you and then you're over it and you're done and you're supposed to be running on, and that's not the way the body works. It's not the way our emotions and our soul work. Grief, what I've learned is it doesn't go away. You learn with grief to sleep with it and to eat with it and to walk alongside of it. But it doesn't go away. It morphs and it changes. But with grief, you learn to live with it. It's not, people say to me all the time, I'm fortunate that people tell me their stories and say to me, "Oh, I'm in so much pain. When will this pain go away? How long will it take?" Well, everybody's journey is different, but I would say don't look at grief as something that has a period behind it because it doesn't. It changes us as humans forever when we grieve big losses. It doesn't mean there isn't happiness again. It doesn't mean that you don't take some of what you learn in grief and I mean, you become a different person. I feel like most people who have big grief journeys become very courageous people. I find, as a rule, most people who have grieved a lot become people of great gratitude. You become thankful for just the smallest good things.
You know, that comment that the grief changes us forever and it doesn't go away, I think that's important to be able to understand. Because if we're expecting when will things get back to normal, if normal means the way it was before, that is an unrealistic expectation that's going to lead to some disappointment. There's one way that I've heard an analogy that I really like, and that is if you're familiar with the Japanese art form of kintsugi, and that is where you take a pottery and it's broken, but it's
Mhm.
repaired, and the repair is done with gold dust along with lacquer, and it looks different than it did before. It's similar, but it's different, but it's even more beautiful. It
Oh, I
is
love that.
unique. It is
Absolutely love
special.
that. I want to hold
It
on to that visual. It's so beautiful.
yes, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful because of its scarring. So if we can look at, okay, I have been through something hard, and if I think, okay, I'm waiting to go back to normal, I've been broken into a million pieces, and you try to glue me back together, and I don't look quite right.
Mm.
Let's reframe it and fill up those cracks with gold and say, no,
Mm.
I'm not the same person I was before, but in some ways, I'm better. I'm different, but it's a good different. Like you said, I am more grateful. I am more
Oh,
passionate. I have more depth. I have more understanding. Um, Good things can come from enduring hard things.
absolutely. 100% all across the board. Everything. First of all, that visual is so gorgeous. I'll hang on to that. I'll find a piece of that pottery online and look at it when we are through with this podcast because that's just an amazing way to look at it. I think for me, I had a big life. I was running two businesses, a very driven person, and I've learned so much through this 5-year journey and looking at my past and learned so much about compassion, self compassion, because I think we live in this world that is, I think, especially as women, we are trying so hard to be perfect. It's like if I can work harder than anybody else, if I can work out harder than anybody else, if my husband's perfect, if my children are perfect, if I have a great job, oh, great, then I'll be loved, then I'm safe, and then I'll be loved. When James died, all of my perfectionist striving, all of my definitions of success just fell away in an instant. It was like I was working. Well, first of all, I would tell you, I felt like I was in an earthquake. It was like the ground beneath me was just rolling. I couldn't find steady ground. But as I began to put my life together, and it didn't come fast for me, I think I made all the mistakes one could make in climbing out of a tough situation. Because as I said before, my tendency was to be quiet and to isolate. But as I began to come out of it, just as you said earlier, my definitions for myself of success or for what was meaningful in life to me became radically different. Starting the podcast that I started, the Soul Talks podcast. Um, I sat back last week. I was being interviewed by someone, and they said, "Well, you had a marketing business that was very successful for 20 years and sold it a couple years ago. You had a jewelry business that was amazing, and had jewelry on all the stars and all the covers of magazines and all that kind of stuff." why start this little podcast thing? And I said, it's funny. I look back at those businesses and I look at how hard I ran and how much I worked, and I never felt the sense of purpose that I do right now, telling other people's survival stories and telling a little bit of my own. The sense of purpose in being in service to the world rather than running at success is so beautiful to me, and it just changes every way I look at the world. Um, so yeah, there are so many changes I could talk to you about that happen because you walk through. I mean, you walk through fire, and it challenges your entire identity. What do you believe? What are your values? And they change, just like my definition of success is no longer what car do I drive, what house do I live in, what's my job title, what's in the bank. That's not my definition of success anymore.
That's such an important reminder because so many of us, probably all of us, you mentioned early, we're seeking when I achieve this, then I will be loved. And I will also be worthy of love when I check this box, when this happens, when the other happens. And there's almost just a template of what success looks like. It looks like a house. It looks like a car. It looks like your jewelry being worn by the superstars. It looks like XYZ. And when we don't achieve that, we can feel like, dang, I failed. I guess I don't have value. I guess I don't have worth. And isn't it wonderful that there are other ways? There are other ways that we actually can reach. And I think houses and cars and all of those things are beautiful and wonderful. I don't have any problem with any of those things, as long as we're not sacrificing ourselves to obtain them.
100%. Nothing wrong with success. I love success, but I think it's how we view ourselves. And, one of the things that's grown so much in my understanding of life, and myself. When James died, there's something, I think it ties to all of our feelings, our lack of worth, our not having compassion for ourselves, our judging ourselves and judging the world around us. But in suicide, there's this, I think, prevalent feeling of, well, I wasn't enough to keep him here. I wasn't lovable enough, or I didn't do something right, and so then where that takes you is, well, I'm not enough to be loved again, or I'm not lovable, or I'm not worthy. And one of the most beautiful things that I have worked on and I believe in, and I talk to everybody, is coming from the positioning of I am enough. I am enough because I'm a human being on this world. I love to say, your DNA will never be lived in this world again. There's nobody else like you. We are here for a reason. We are meant to be here, and we are worthy just because we are. And we've always been enough, and we will always be enough. And if you can take those words and say them over and over and over to yourself, if you write them on your mirror in lipstick, if you stick them in your wallet or whatever you do, and really try to metabolize the fact that you as a human being don't have to do one thing to be enough. If you begin to see yourself through that lens, what also happens is you begin to have a great compassion for others around you. Instead of being so annoyed at the guy who's being loud at the table, next to you, you go, I guess something really hurt him in his childhood and he needs to be loud and noisy because he needs some attention. You just tend to have a ripple effect of compassion. But I think if I could tell anybody how to work on themselves as they're coming out of all the things I like to say every single person in the world is on a survival journey. We are all surviving something, and our survival feels like it's the hardest thing in the world. But if you begin to really reach for self-affirming, life-affirming words of I am enough, and you can, it's supported whether you're in a spiritual journey that is metaphysical, or if you're in a spiritual journey where you're in any kind of faith movement, you will find yourself supported by that sense of, yeah, you as a human being are worthy just exactly like you are.
And that message is so important. And yet sometimes we create walls and barriers to being able to accept that message. I can say it, but I don't
Mhm.
necessarily believe it. And so I think as we share our stories, we want to open up people's idea, at least to the possibility, just open up a little bit that maybe what we're saying is true. And then if that's where you're at right now, then let's accept that. My heart just aches. It just reaches out to the suffering and the loss and the questions. And especially when it comes to suicide, there is an additional layer of questioning. It is part of our subconscious, part of its job to take every event that happens to us and try to create meaning. Why did this happen? What does this mean? And we create a story about what it means. And then we tuck it inside and we live according to that story. And sometimes the stories come up of, oh, well, that means I wasn't good enough. Oh, that means I failed. Oh, that means. So I'm going to ask people to just pause for a moment and recognize what is happening. This is our mind trying to make sense out of the event. So let's give some other possibilities. Let's try on another possible meaning. How about the meaning is that this is so that I can become stronger. This is so that I can become more compassionate. Um, the universe is designed for our growth, not necessarily our comfort. And so when hard things happen, we might say, oh, this is for my growth. And then when it comes to the other person, we don't need to accept the responsibility for their decision. I have some wonderful neighbors whose son killed himself, and they chose on his obituary to say he died from depression. And I thought that that was a very beautiful way to put it. There was no blame. It was he was struggling and he succumbed to his struggle. We don't need to judge that. We don't need to condemn it. We don't even need to justify it. It happened. So now that it happened, let's try to make sense of it in a way that benefits us, that gives compassion for everyone involved, because condemning doesn't help.
100%. It's a tough tightrope, especially at first. I've talked to so many psychologists and psychiatrists along the way. James and I had been in therapy for a year prior to his suicide. And it was so comforting to me. And she's a renowned and amazing therapist. She sat with me for hours after his death. And she said, Theresa, I have been a therapist for my whole life. And this woman was close to 80 at the time. And um, she said, I never saw this coming. I was treating James, and I would never have said that he would have taken his life. And I hear that now over and over and over again from others who have survived someone's suicide. You can't have stopped it if that was their intent. We do tend to blame ourselves and go, what could I have done to keep him here? Why did this happen? What did I do wrong? It has nothing to do with you. And I mean it. It has nothing to do with you when someone chooses to end their life on this earth. But you're exactly right. The only choice we have afterwards is to make something of the tragedy. And that's why I started my podcast. And it took me a long time. It took me 4 years to say, okay, I've got to do something in this world that makes some sense of this tragedy. And the only way I know to do it is a way I'm uncomfortable with. And that's to be really vulnerable about my own story, be willing to put it out there, no matter what anybody says about it. This is what happened to me. This is what I'm doing to try to survive. And then to welcome others into a space that hopefully they can share their own really tough stuff. I would like to also say, as we're talking about this, it's so easy to say, well, you got to have courage, or, oh, believe in yourself, have positive affirmations, those kinds of things. I'd want to tell your audience, it's been 5 years. since James died. I still talk to him all the time, love him more than ever. But I kind of think about my survival journey as like climbing Mount Everest. You know, I feel like at the 5 year point, I've made it to base camp. I can see the top of the mountain. I'm not as far down below as I was before, but please don't hear me talk and think that I've made it because I haven't. I have so far to go, but I think I'm at base camp.
Thank you. Thank you for including that clarification because it matters. We don't have to wait to share until we have climbed the mountain, until we are perfect, until everything is all better. Because as we've already referred to, it's not really all better, it's different. Things are different.
Yeah, I
But
feel
we
like
can be okay and we can feel joy and we can feel fulfillment. And these things matter.
two things I would say. I think it's so important to share in our imperfection, in our humanity. And I had a good friend once, she had this wonderful saying, and I would laugh at her, and she would say, "It's okay not to be okay." And I was like, "You're right. It is okay not to be okay. And I am just not okay." But it's a wonderful saying to hold on to because you go, "Okay, I'm enough just like this and I'm okay."
Oh, what a beautiful permission to give ourselves. Because as we're going through our journey, and maybe even parts of every day, we don't feel okay. And that's normal. And that is okay. So, what a relief. What a relief. So, as we're talking about, we can have joy, we can have meaning, we can have all of these things. We don't need to expect that we're going to feel all that day one. We're looking for our destination because if we don't have a destination, we're never going to get there. If I just stay in grief, if I just stay in misery, that's not a good place to live. Yes, we may have to travel through it. In fact, chances are we are going to travel through it. Let's not set up camp here. Let's not live here. Let's travel through and work our way to something better.
I think, and I know we just have a few seconds left. The first step out for me, um, and I don't want this to sound gratuitous, was gratitude. And I don't mean in a big way. I was not grateful for his death, and I was not grateful for what was happening to me. But I would consciously get up in the morning and I would try to do three things. I would open the drapes and I would look outside and I would say, "I'm grateful. I'm just grateful for the day." And that was the most I could do. The second thing was I tried to get out of bed and I wanted to make coffee for myself. Those sound like the tiniest little things. But for me, gratitude, even if it's just to say, "I'm grateful I can open the drapes. I'm grateful the sun's out." Gratitude is a page turner. It absolutely reframes the way we feel our fear and our anxiousness and our depression. So if you can just find one tiny thing each day when you wake up, just one little thing to be grateful for, you will feel your spirit shift a little bit, just a tiny bit out of that grief.
What beautiful and simple advice. And sometimes we think simple means easy, and that's not necessarily true. Thank you for sharing that. And again, let's clarify just a little bit. When we go through hard things, I don't have to be grateful for the hard thing. I can never say I'm grateful that I lost this person, or probably that's not where it's going to be. That's okay. But what am I grateful for? Can I open the windows? Is there sunshine that's still warming our planet and giving us light? Is there something that I can be grateful for? Wow, I was strong enough to get out of bed today. Oh, good job, me. I am so grateful for that. And gratitude sometimes can sound like a really, I don't know, like a Pollyanna or just a, I mean,
Exactly.
don't give me something stupid when I'm dealing with real things. But the research that talks about what gratitude does to our brain and to our body, it is amazing. They've done studies. It actually improves the neuroplasticity of the brain, which means our ability to adapt, which is literally resilience.
Our ability to
When
survive. Exactly.
when we are grateful, it gives us more power to be able to take the next step. And it does it on a physiological level. This is not just try to make yourself feel better. It's literally changing your brain to help you be able to overcome your current challenge. And that matters because it's a simple tool that can produce great results. So thank you so much for bringing that up. Is there anything else you want to make sure that we cover before we close today?
I would just want to say that I think when you take those bits of gratitude for the smallest of things, like I think I survived in part because my children were there. I had two boys, and I think all of us as mothers, we will take extraordinary measures, do extraordinary things for our children that we wouldn't do for ourselves. But I think in talking about gratitude and the ways that we can begin to walk out of grief and fear and shame, it's a muscle. It act just like you said, it's a muscle. So if you can just take one tiny step today, it'll be easier to take a little bit more the next day. And you might fall back days. Believe me, I did. I've done it all.
You did.
But I think believe that you will walk out of it. You will walk out.
What a comforting, important message. Theresa, thank you so much for visiting with me today. I appreciate you.
Having me, and again for your amazing work in this world. Sending all your listeners love.
Thank you. In closing, I'd like to share a quote by Isabel Allende. She said, "Everybody has losses. It's unavoidable in life. Sharing our pain is very healing." Today, I invite our listeners to find a safe place to share our pain and to learn and grow from it. See you next time on Linda's Corner.
Thanks for listening. Please share and subscribe to help us reach new listeners. And if you'd like to heal your life from the inside out, there is a free video series at hopeforhealingfoundation.org. Just click on the free stuff tab. I also invite you to grab a copy of one of my books, like Crushed, A Journey Through Depression, and You Got This, an action plan to calm fear, anxiety, worry, and stress. See you next time on Linda's Corner.